before, this is not my machine, so if it just goes out and dies, it's not my fault. Just so you know. All right. Come on in. Fine to see it. It's cool. Don't worry, we haven't started yet. All's well. We're hanging out. We're just learning more about the audience. It's all good. So since you came in last, I gotta ask now. Distro you run?
You want the full list or just?
What's that?
Do you want the full
No,
list?
most recent. What you got? What you're kicking and rocking right now?
Oh no, I guess SUSE, CentOS, Ubuntu, everything.
I understand. Okay, so you have a problem making up your mind like I do. I understand. Completely
No,
understand.
I don't make mine. Somebody makes it for me, really.
Oh, fair enough. Oh, so you're married? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Life is much easier when people tell you what you should do.
That's completely accurate. Just so everyone knows, today I'm gonna put my wife on the spot and torment her a little bit. Her name is Shannon. She's sitting right here taping me. Everybody say hi, Shannon. Hi, Shannon. There you go. Okay. It's just now we're at an AA meeting. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So Shannon's here helping me out. She was kind enough to put up with my crap to come out and let me come do this talk for you guys. And since we apparently have audio only right now, hi guys.
Maybe record your screen too.
What's that? It's all lies. It's all lies. Well, that was my original plan until my machine apparently died in a fire over here. Yeah, good times. No, welcome, bienvenue, come on in, it's all good. Sit down, you're good. But since we don't have video right now, fortunately she's going to help me out with this, so this will still be on the internet, and I'll make sure that Linuxfest has all the information to point you guys to it if you find something useful out of it or think a colleague might too. So mixed OS infrastructure, no money, no time, just black magic. So basically I have been working in the IT technology infrastructure space for probably approaching 9-10 years. So been doing a lot of very interesting things. So let me take a step back. Who am I? My name is Ray Shimko. I'm a Tarith. I like long walks on the beach and boring the living hell out of my wife Shannon. As we said before, Shannon's right here. On those walks discussing infrastructure, Linux, and all things open source. So actually, by her allowing me to come here today, she doesn't have to listen to me prattle on tomorrow because I got to fly over 3,000 miles away to talk to all of you today about what I love to talk about. That eyes glaze over for her. So, moving on. So, most people then usually say, okay, well, what's your title? Come on in, enjoy. It's all good. So what's my title? I usually joke and tell everybody I'm the overlord of infrastructure, and they all look at me kind of like you're looking at me right now. Why in the sweet hell would you tell anyone that? So like the slides are saying, titles are useless, especially in our field, in my opinion. It doesn't tell me anything about you as a person or what you do on a daily basis. So if someone walks up to you and says, what's your title? I basically laugh at them and I'm like, how about I tell you what I actually do? Because it's basically stupid. And if anybody managed to read the second bullet point, fantastic. But seriously, if someone came up to me and said they're a 10th degree black belt in server administration, I will in fact find at home back in Pittsburgh, I know it's far, far away from you guys, we have a nice, delightful place called Woolly Market, and I would find a gigantic wet trout and hit them in the face as hard as I could. That would happen. And just for anybody who loves D&D, as much as I do, all saving throws are in fact nullified, even if you roll a natural 20. So, moving right along. So, the real question is, what do I actually do? As the GIF shows you up here, I shove square pegs in round holes. Because that's what everybody I've ever worked for has wanted me to do. That said, not where I work now, please don't fire me. No, but everywhere I've worked has always asked for something that's wholly ridiculous. Okay, and we'll get into some of those things today. And I'm going to pose a few questions to you guys. This will be interactive. If you were hoping to fall asleep or sit in a carb coma, I'm really sorry. That's probably not going to happen in my talk. So, most of the time, when people ask me to do something in infrastructure, whether it be build a server, whether it be set up a wireless network, set up a wired network, whatever it might be. Generally, they'll come to me and say, you have little to no budget, we need it like tomorrow, and it needs to do all of these delightful things, including pass these 4 security compliances. And you kind of look at them and you're like, no, none of that's going to happen. But I'll come close, right? So again, square peg, round hole. So before I delve too deep into things, if anybody actually read things, there is actually a really funny story about a Keurig. This is the Keurig I have at home with Shannon and I. So what you'll notice about this particular brand of Keurig is that it is a side water-filled Keurig. So you have to actually go over to the sink, fill it up, put the water in. It's kind of annoying, right? But let's face it, I can't rationalize getting a direct water line injected one. Okay, it's the house. So one of the places I previously worked at, won't say where, I had the CEO of the company come up to me after I'd been there for about 6 months, and he asked me to find out how much it would cost and what we could do to get a direct waterline fed injected Keurig machine in our office and how quickly we could do it. That's not a joke. He was dead serious, and he wanted to know in about an hour. Not even kidding, okay? So when you work in infrastructure in the real world, you're going to deal with people who have no idea what in the hell you do for them, okay? This is just generally how that works. Not everybody's like that, but generally the higher you go up the scale, the less and less they know about you, right? So I did what the CEO asked. I started looking, furiously Googling, how much that would be and whatnot. So the office manager at the time levitated across the office as she did and wanted to know why I was looking into these things. She's like, are you trying to take my job? No, I just want to keep my own. He's the CEO. He can just be like, you're fired. So, just trying to keep him happy. So if anybody goes and has a Keurig, goes and gets coffee later, you can think about the very, very sad CEO who knew absolutely nothing about what I did in infrastructure. So I have some questions for you guys. Like I was mentioning before, these questions are all real-world situations I have been in, and I'm going to pose a few questions to you guys because I want to get an idea of how you would tackle them using, obviously, Linux and open source-based things, right? So we'll see how close you guys come with things I may or may not have had a choice to have to utilize. Fair enough? Okay, is there anybody who doesn't want me putting them on the spot, has like a heart condition, anything like that? Fantastic, no one's going to die. All right, so we're going to move on. So first question. So how would you deploy antivirus to a company of, we'll call it 250, staff using Windows, Linux, and OS X, I can't talk, without any of the machines being on a domain? You are in a domainless environment. Active Directory is not a thing. LDAP is sort of kind of a thing. None of the workstations, none of the laptops, nothing is actually joined to the domain. What do you do?
Semantic endpoint protection manager.
Case server.
Did you really go to semantic first? I was really hoping it would be at least a few minutes. I'm kidding. Sorry.
Install a domain. Case server.
What's that? All right, installing a domain. Who said installing a domain? What's that? I love you, because that's the first thing I said. I'm like, what do you do? You failed step 1. You need a domain. Sorry. Continue. Sorry.
Dell case server.
Dell case server. Okay. Valid option. Okay. Anybody else?
Panda endpoint.
I'm sorry?
Panda endpoint.
Panda endpoint, stay right there. I love that man. He's awesome. Your glasses, fantastic. Extremely sexy. I like it. So this guy said Panda. Okay, who else?
Ansible.
Ansible. Okay, so you're going to Ansibilize all of the workstations with a handful of scripts to deploy antivirus. So I'll give you partial credit because that part will work, but we'll come back to why that would be rough later. Anybody else? Any other takers? It's okay if you don't. Once.
Educate the users.
What's that?
Educate the users.
Educate the users. What are you going to educate them to do?
What's that?
What are you going to educate them to do? To install antivirus.
Yeah.
Okay. You still got to give them a solution. You can't just say, hey, you all need antivirus immediately. Be like, all right, which one? That one. Point to the internet. You got to give them something, right? Okay. Anybody else before we move on to the actual answer? No? Any takers? Okay. All right, so we'll move on. So, Panda Man over there, my hero, my spirit animal. Yeah, we ended up actually implementing Panda's cloud-based antivirus. The reason that we did that, I'm not going to give too much away because there's a few other questions around that. But the long and the short of it was, going back to the gentleman in the back as far as educating your users, that's actually a valid point. There is a way for you to basically email all of the users and say, click this button, it shall do things, and it will install the antivirus for them, because let's face it, you don't want to confuse your users, right? Click this button, it does stuff, you don't have to care, have a good day, right? It's literally what happens. So now if anybody's thinking real hard right now, they're saying, but Ray, how do you actually know they installed it? How are you going to manage it? These are all very valid questions, right? Hold tight, it's coming, I promise, okay? But so far, that man over there, Cupid doll, I love you. If I had swag, you'd get it. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't you train people not to click on links like that?
What's that?
Don't worry, it's from IT.
So no, actually, no, wait a minute. I'm going to sidebar, because that's actually a valid point. Okay, so here's the thing, is that if my user base has so many technical problems that they're going to click on phishing emails, malware things, all that very stuff, if they can't suss that out, or at an absolute minimum, come to me and say, Ray, overlord of infrastructure, should I click this? I have much bigger problems, right? So I have already failed educating them as far as being an average or above average technical user on my network, right? But that's a valid point. Where I am today, the actual stated security policy around that is don't embed any links in emails. Even if it's something, say like, for argument's sake, we'll just play around with things and say, I send you a Jira link and a ticket. That's fine, but you can't embed it. You have to actually write out or copy the entire link. You cannot embed it and say like the word, happy text is gonna kill your machine.exe. Okay. They get very grumpy about that. To me personally, I think that's a little crazy. I would rather just educate my users to basically be better users. So no, that's an absolutely valid point. Very astute of you, young sir. Question 2. How would you make sure that everyone in the company actually had the antivirus installed with no domain? Yes, sir, in the corner.
Just find a way to infect it. Everyone doesn't have it installed.
I like this guy. He's just like, I'm taking a black hat approach. I'm just going to mess everybody up and then let's just see who's good. I'm sorry. Yes, sir, in a hat.
VNC and an all-nighter.
VNC and an all-nighter. Okay, so what's that? So we were saying before, rough estimate was about 250, give or take. VNC, with or without encryption?
It's all on a local network.
What's that? That's exposed to the internet. Fail. Anyways, no, I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, VNC, if you had it encrypted properly, would be a semi-viable option in a small network, assuming that you have well-educated users. So let me put a lot of ifs in front of that statement. But no, just point taken. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Does your Panda Cloud report to a console how many machines have had this service or this product installed, so you can just look at your installed base and you're missing some?
So I'll tell you what, I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna put a pin in it, but in a minute you might be getting a Cupid doll. So the short answer is it's coming, and I'll tell you in a minute. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Nmap and Google Sheets.
Nmap and Google. Really? I went Google Sheets. You could at least go on LibreOffice on me. Really? Like, give me something. No, but that's fine.
Cloud.
What's that? Yeah. We have to cloudify all the things.
Yeah.
What's that? Did you see Brian Lunduke's talk today? Yesterday? Internet of Things? We're all going to die. What are you doing?
Yes.
I'm just kidding. No, it's fine. Anybody else? No? Really? Guys, I'm not scary, I promise. Yes, sir.
Ansible?
Ansible. And see, that's 2 for Ansible. See, +1 Ansible. There you go. Ansible, viable option. But going back to the other gentleman's question, it's going to be a little bit tough to confirm things were done unless you actually have a real idempotent script that would actually come back and basically skip itself right when you rerun it. So, yeah, I'll give you that. Sounds good. All right. Anybody else? For the record, all the Ansible people, I don't hate you. I actually really like you. I use Ansible almost daily, just for the record. I'm just giving you a hard time. Okay, so nobody else? Once? Twice? Yes, sir.
Mass email, reply required.
Mass email replier, you're fired. Okay, I now know where the Iron Fist sits in the room. It's right back there. That's awesome. That is certainly an approach. I don't know how effective it is. It's a lot like the management technique of threatening you with your job. It usually doesn't come back and work that well. Usually people just quit or just don't do it. Okay, so any more? We good? Okay. So going back to this gentleman's astute observation, Panda's cloud-based antivirus has a single web-based dashboard to track this from the client that gets installed. So basically, I had a website that I could go to, log in, two-factor auth, do all kinds of exciting things that I wanted to do, go in and immediately see, oh, okay, here's all the list of all the computer names. I can break it out based on Windows, I can break it out on Mac, I can break it out on Windows. So I even not only know that everybody installed it, I know what group you fall in. So either I really like you, I like you less, or I'm asking why the hell you're using that operating system. I'll let you guys decide which is which. So absolutely, if I had another Cupidol, sir, you would have it. So question 3. So how can you ensure antivirus won't impact the IOPS of the machine? I like that guy immediately laughs. You must work with some of the highest touch developers and engineers in the universe. Just makes me smile. Sorry. So thoughts, feelings?
Ionize?
What's that? Ionize?
Ionize.
All right. Sorry. For those of you who might not know what IOPS is, so input-output operations on a machine. I'm sorry. I don't want to. To be fair, I'm getting a little bit more steeped in jargon, and everybody might not catch it. So that's my fault. Yes, sir.
But antivirus is supposed to affect the IOPS.
Say that again. Sorry.
Antivirus is supposed to do exactly that, right? Because if it saturates the IOPS, you can't get a virus. Right?
Yes. So let me translate to the rest of you. If you run Symantec, it will ruin your machine, so it won't matter. It's going to run like garbage, so you'll never get a virus. At least that's what I'm thinking.
So,
Yes, sir.
I guess the reason I laughed is there like a threshold of pain? Or is it like somebody's going to notice if there's an effect at all?
So to your point, perception of the user and threshold of pain. So it's extremely subjective, as much as I'd love to make it scientific. It's much more subjective, right? So every place you work at, this is going to be different, right? Because there are some folks that, you could put Symantec on there, and they work in finance, and they use Excel, the internet, and email, right? They're not going to notice, right? Unless it makes Excel cry, and then the world's going to end. But if you have, a extremely proficient developer architecture of an application, and he notices that his machine is now, for lack of more technical terminology, farting, he's going to be really upset, right? But I'm sorry. Yes.
To answer after I ask the question, you just got to know your pain points.
Yes.
You pick where it's going to fail. Like you might not care about finance, but the dev, or certainly the CEO who asks for Keurig doesn't need to have his computer farting.
Right. Absolutely. So hold on to that thought, because that's actually pretty close to where we're going with this. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Panda? Okay. So you're hoping that Panda will tell you that it won't impact IOPS.
They will.
Actually, hold on to that. We're going to come back to that, actually.
They will tell you whatever you want.
We'll tell you all the things. No, it's not a silver bullet, I promise. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
When you deploy it, can you specify that it should skip certain applications, particularly IOPS intensive, like database applications?
Oh, yeah, sure. So question being, does it have an exclusion list? Can you pre-configure that? Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
So that might minimize the...
Sure. Absolutely. Anybody else?
Schedule their daily scans for night.
Schedules daily scans for night. Somebody used Symantec back there. I'm kidding. I'm just giving Symantec a hard time. No, that's actually a very valid point. Control when you're scanning, right? So if you do have a solution that's going to impact your IOPS, right? Okay, well, let's at least try and turn it on in a time frame that the machine's not going to be in use, right? Or in very light use, right? Anybody else? No? Once? Twice? Okay. So basically, this is what we ended up doing. So we ended up testing it on a small sample size of my most needy individuals, who in this particular situation happen to be developers. We had to make sure there was no perceptible impact whatsoever. So basically, I took the R&D team, I took the architecture team, and I took the highest level devs that we had that did a lot of support for our clients and basically said, install this, run, go enjoy, make your machine cry. Tell me if you notice a difference. And they ran it for approximately a month, month and a half. And basically after that time, they're like, we didn't even know that it was installed. They're like, honestly, had you not forced us to do the install, we wouldn't have known there was anything different. So that was very, very important to them. And, you know, I'll get into some of the other benefits as well in a minute, but yes, sir.
Were you responding to an infection with this trial?
Was I responding to an infection?
Yeah, like
No.
you get an infection, then you install it for a month with
No.
test user group, and then
No, this wasn't a reactionary situation where we got hacked or owned, or there was just something crazy going on from someone, you know, clicking on virus.exe. No, nothing like that. This was me from one standpoint, riding in on the horse to bring, you know, order to the lawless Wild West town that it was.
okay.
So it was more, we're trying to be proactive before we have that problem in this situation. So, but one of the nice perks about this is that we were talking about exclusion lists a moment ago as far as what you can exclude or whatnot ahead of time. So you can do that from that web dashboard, but it also is built out of the box to be a client that actually does all of the heavy lifting in the background in the cloud, actually, for whoever was talking about the cloud earlier. So that's part of the reason why it's almost imperceptible as far as an IOPS hit, right? So it's almost a dumb client, which is kind of great. So how would you handle, this is where it gets fun, how would you handle authentication if you had to support Windows, Linux, and OS X devices with no domain? Okay. Now let me give you a couple caveats, nuances to this. So no domain, you have access to an LDAP server and everyone has an account already. Okay. So let me just paint you a little bit more of a picture. It must support all three, and it can't make everyone miserable. Okay. Yes, sir.
What the hell is an OSX?
Oh, sorry. OS X is, so an OS X is basically just a Mac. So Apple laptop. Oh, this is a very ballsy gentleman in the back who actually lifted his Apple laptop. You, sir, brass balls. I like you. What's that? Okay, it dual boots? Okay, we can still be friends. That's okay. We're good. I was gonna say, otherwise you're gonna buy me a beer later. This is not cool. Yeah, so that's what I mean when I say OS X. So apologies. Let me clarify that. So thoughts, feelings, emotions. Yes, sir.
Could, you could connect them all to the LDAP. I know for a fact Linux you can connect to the LDAP. As far as OS X, I'm going to assume since it's a Unix base, it's probably fairly simple as well. Assuming that it's open LDAP or, anything like 389 or 636. Windows.
That's a lot of work.
It's not so bad, especially now. But Windows, there's like Gina, which you can install that'll allow it to connect to third part, not domains, basically, to a different LDAP, or even, I think it even supports like MySQL if you wanted to connect it to that.
Okay.
Supports a bunch of
All right, so I'll give you 2/3 on that because we can come to an understanding on Linux and Mac, and then we'll say Windows is kind of, we'll call it a crapshoot. Might work, might not, might be a little messy, right? Okay. Yes, sir.
I would think certificate capacity for the LDAP, Kerberos or something of that ilk would be the universal or generic fashion of dealing with depth. Without the LDAP, it would get more fun, but with the LDAP, you can at least start sending certificates around, and that should help.
Okay, so let me just make sure I have that solution. So we're talking LDAP, certificate-based authentication, and basically go from there, more or less. And that should pretty much cover you around for
At
the
least
most
from
part.
the start, I know that you
Okay.
would have to do a lot of setup ahead
Okay.
of time, because you would have to make sure that weird OS 8X thing goes on, and then you can deal with the other two.
Okay, so basically LDAP, Kerberos, security certs. Got it. Okay, all right, I'll buy that. Anybody else?
I mean,
Yes, sir.
using Samba to build a domain.
Okay.
Also something.
Okay, I'll buy that. Would take some work, but sure. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Puppet.
Puppet. So Puppet is going to do all authentication across all three OSs itself.
Well, I mean, you could create local users. Not ideal.
Central administration.
If I
will
could,
murder you.
if I couldn't run a domain,
Okay, if you couldn't run it. Okay, so I will
or
say.
some sort of LDAP.
So I will say that is workable, but you are making yourself some rounded stuff to deal with. But yeah, I mean technically that would work. Anybody else? No? I'm not scary, I promise. Okay. To be fair, this is kind of a rough question. So, all right. Anybody else? Any takers? Yes.
Can you do radius? I'm not too familiar with it on all three.
Keep talking.
I don't know. I've set up AAA like once. On a Cisco router, but
Okay.
I've heard radius.
Okay. So whether you've only heard of Radius once or twice, ironically, you're actually one of the closest. So, hang on for 1 second. Anybody else? Now that I've given a hint.
This is authentication to what? Is this just for getting into the machine?
Basically, this is centralized authentication. So centralized authentication. So you don't have a domain, but you need some way to authenticate, right? Whether it be to a network, to something, so that there is a way to know the proper people are on your network, right? So just to clarify. Yes, sir.
We'll go with cat cards.
Cat cards?
Yep.
All right.
You don't need a domain, you can have multiple domains.
Mhm.
Your user has to be able to carry it, but you're using them for identification against the LDAP, and then if you end up adding the domain or multiple domains later, you can still hold it, but like
Mhm.
the authentication's there.
Okay. All right. All really good ideas, actually. Anybody else? No? Yes?
Is there a panda thing too?
You circle C a lot on tests when you see a pattern, don't you? Because you know what, I did too. That's okay.
Guess where he's gonna work.
Yeah, yeah, right. No. Anybody else before I move on? No? Okay. So actually what we did was 802.1x authentication. It worked across all three OSs. So basically what we did was we had, and let me move on just real quick. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what we did, because it's going to come back to this question a little bit, because this is kind of an extension of that. Okay. But again, this young sir right here gave you a delightful hint at where I'm going with this. But the long and the short of it was 802.1x, you can do network-based authentication based off of the networking gear that we had at the time. It happened to be Juniper. But there was a way to do just straight network authentication. So you basically didn't have to care if it was an Apple product, if it was Linux. With Windows, you had to tweak about 11 settings when I stopped counting. But it was a more of a one-off thing. It was a set it, forget it, it works, hooray. And there was a small enough populace of Windows users at the time, it wasn't that bad. So. But I'm going to move directly into this because this is kind of an extension of that. So how would you enforce network logins for Windows, Linux, and OS X users, Apple users, with no domain? And I even prefix this with, yes, this is a hard question, I know. And it's somewhat of the same question, but I'm getting a little bit more granular.
Do you mean enforce login in order to access the network, or?
No, I mean, so when I say enforce network logins, I mean a way for you to centrally administer like passwords, things like password policy, stuff like that. So we've now identified a way to authenticate them, but now how are you going to centrally administrate that authentication to your users, right? Across all the platforms. So that's that to clarify. Anybody else? Thoughts? This question blows, and I made it that way on intention. Yes.
What happens with Windows when you authenticate against radios? Does it cache it, the logins, or do they go off the network and then they can log in, or what's the story?
So with Radius, think of Radius without giving it away. Think of Radius as a traffic cop, and Radius is what Radius does really well is look at external sources of information and things like that. So,
Well, I mean, you take your laptop at home, right? How do you log in then?
you can still cache things locally, right? So you can still have a local profile. So to take a step back, you still have a local profile on the machine, but you actually authenticate with 802.1x, like we were just talking about, when you connect to the network. So while you still have a local account and you can do local things, you get no network access whatsoever to anything until you authenticate, right? So in a sideways way, it's actually almost another factor of authentication, right? Because if you crack the local, you still don't know what their network-based password is yet. So you get very limited access. So it's just another layer. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So, did you just configure the ports to require authentication to allow traffic?
So keep talking. That is part of what I did.
Okay. So using Radius and authenticating against the already existing LDAP. So they
Keep going.
log into their systems when they go to connect to the network. They have to enter their username and password, kind of like you do with Wi-Fi, but as far as with their even hardline network.
Yeah, if I had a beer, I'd actually give it to you right now because that's exactly what I did. So I'm not going to put anybody else through any more misery because, again, that question sucks. And I made it so quite on purpose. So, yeah, we used 802.1x at the switch. They happen to be Juniper. Basically, from there, configured the port to point to our Open Radius server that was stood up. The Open Radius server, basically, as I said a moment ago, is more or less your traffic cop. It passes that authentication information. And it basically goes back to LDAP and says, hey, is this guy really Ray Shimko? Because I don't know. LDAP says, sure, yeah. Goes back to Radius, goes back right down the whole layer, right? Back, everything's authenticated, you're ready to rock and roll. So it's a great way to do, a couple little handoffs, and you now have basically centralized authentication across your network, across all the platforms. Yes, sir?
Did it work if you had users switch at the end machine?
Say that one more time, I'm sorry?
So did it work if you had users switch at the end machine, like two people using the same?
Yeah.
So it was good enough to say, oh, even though this other user hasn't logged out, I have to kill the connection because user B has jumped on that same machine and just switched.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is actually, yeah. So it is intelligent enough to do that, yeah.
But
So,
is that what you want to do on Linux server with 16 users, right?
say that again?
Is that what you want to do on Linux machine with 16 users?
Well, so in this particular situation, we're talking about, a user who happens to have a Linux laptop, desktop, whatever, right? We're not necessarily talking about doing server-based authentication for a whole bunch of people, right? We're talking about just, a developer laptop, right? Somebody that it's going to be issued to person X, they're going to have it. If, the developer sitting next to them was like, crap, you know what, can I borrow your box for a minute? It would still work. They could still use their authentication on another machine because, again, it's at that network level, right? So you could just, slap on another local user account, have them log in, off they go, for the most part. So
if one user SSH to another user's laptop, it cuts the first user off, right?
So in the setup that we had, they wouldn't be able to do that, actually, because we had to intervene on security.
So
you couldn't just SSH.
So it's not multi-user anymore.
No, it's still multi-user. Yeah, no. You can absolutely still use it for multiple users. Absolutely, you can. You would just either need a second user account, or you would have to log out of account 1, right, on the network, and log into account 2. So yeah, I mean, is there a portion of this that is hinging on the user being a user who actually knows what they're doing? A little bit, sure. But there are also ways to make this a lot easier Say for, we were talking about the finance team earlier. I was picking on finance team. There are ways, so if they have to use Windows, there's also ways that you can set it up so that it automatically does that authentication for them. So they don't even have to see it. They just log in their local user account, off they go. They don't care, but that authentication is still happening,
So,
right?
so to be clear, that like your team made the decision that the actual like asset that's in the field was not the security focus. You were more worried about protecting the network.
Correct.
Okay, so that, all right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, no.
That's the expendable part.
I was just gonna say, I'm glad you clarified that. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So we were like, hey, if somebody runs off with that or does whatever, it's fine. They can't do anything with it, right? For the most part. But yeah, that was the trade-off we made, if you will.
And the follow-up on that is, did you have anyone like doing RoadWarrior, VPN, or any stuff like that that you had to worry about? Like, or was pretty much everyone just in, you didn't have to worry about VPN access to the network?
So we did have a VPN appliance from Juniper, which handled all of that. So basically, it dumped them into their own segregated VLAN initially to make the initial connection, and then once they were authenticated, it would dump them into the original VLAN as if they were sitting at their desk. So basically, inter-VLAN security would still be in place. So yeah. Yep. So now that I've gone through the terrible questions, we're almost done. Let's move on. So if you were having, we're completely switching gears, by the way. If you were having intermittent connectivity issues to the internet, what tools might you use to track that down? To clarify, ideally open source tools, right? Linux type open source diagnostic tools. And go. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Wireshark.
Wireshark? Absolutely.
Sit between on switch and do a monitor session.
Okay. Wireshark is a viable option. Anybody else?
MTR.
MTR. Who said MTR? I want to give you a hug. I love you. Okay. Anybody else?
And
Nmap? Okay, if you're looking for ports and things like that. Okay. Anybody else?
Airmon NG.
Okay.
Traceroute.
Traceroute. Okay. Anybody else?
Extended ping and
Standard ping. I'm so happy someone said ping. I was going to cry if nobody said ping. Sorry.
log it and
Go
just see
ahead.
how many packets you drop over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, add a dash T at the end. Just let that baby run wild if you're not on a Linux box. Yep, absolutely. What else?
Dig.
Dig? I like you too, wherever you are. I'm sorry. Yes, I like you too. Dig works. Anybody else?
I can't think of it, but the network equivalent of IOStat.
Okay.
The network equivalent of that.
Okay.
Not IOStat itself, but something that would give me data over time, so it'd be tied into SAR too.
Okay. Okay. All valid options. I haven't heard an invalid option yet.
Netstat.
Okay.
There you go, that's that one.
Yeah. That sounds weird. All right. Anybody else? We'll put this one out of its misery pretty quick.
There's a thing and that runs MTR or ping that tracks it over time. I can't remember what it's called though.
I like you. You hang out. We're gonna be buddies. I'm just saying. So MTR is exactly what we use. So in our case, it showed us that we were dropping a ton of packets at our ISP's edge router in the office. So basically, they were less than a mile away from us. So we basically threatened the life of their level 3 engineer. He got in his Civic and he basically did 100 to our office because we were threatening not his life, more his equipment. So it was good.
You do it or we'll take it down for you.
That is pretty much. I will tell you that in the middle of this happening, I had about 35 developers envelop my desk around me, chanting hate at the top of their lungs, while the internet was down, whilst I was waiting for the Civic to come down the road, because they thought I did it. Wasn't me. Ironically, who was the guy I was talking to earlier? It really was the network. It wasn't me for one. Yeah, so it was great times. But yes, in the real world, apparently, developers will band together and revolt if you do a bad enough job and they think it's your fault. Just moral of that story. So basically, real quick, because I wanted to touch on MTR just real quick. I am not going to read all of this at you because I am not a lunatic. But basically, this is literally straight from the man page of what MTR is. And I cared enough about it to actually throw it up here for you guys because it's actually an insanely useful tool. I didn't know about it until we had this problem. For the record, if anybody actually uses an Apple product and tries to install MTR, it sucks to get configured because at the time I had no choice. But it is doable. So it's a very useful tool. I highly recommend using it. There are some caveats to getting some false positives and stuff like that, but as a quick diagnostic tool to get a sense of what's going on, it's kind of like ping and trace route on crack. So something to put in your tool belt and at least learn a little bit more about, right? So I'll leave it up there for just another second or two because I know there's a ton of data, but really, guys, you can literally sudo apt-get install MTR or apt, get whatever, MTR, and just look at the man page. It's actually really useful. So I'm showing my age because I said apt-get install. But anyways, so this is just what it basically looks like. I just wanted to throw this up there because this is what it looks like, and basically the ugly, hideous 100% loss is what you care about. Now, obviously down here, this is clearly not in your network unless you hate yourself as far as naming schemes go. But realistically, for a second, let's pretend this 100 is, say, up here, right? For argument's sake, it happens to be internal. Maybe it's a data center, whatever. That's your edge device. You want to cry and threaten whoever is providing you network, okay? So yeah, I'm sorry? Oh, I thought there was a question, I'm sorry. All right. Was there? I'm sorry.
Someone's on the phone.
Oh, okay.
I just have a comment about MTR. Getting in both directions is really key.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because like I was touching on a minute ago, there are times where this might throw you for a bit of a loop. Like for instance, you might have say 60% packet loss here, but then 0 here. Okay, well that device might actually just not have. Might not be returning ICMP, might be rate limiting, there are reasons, right? But realistically, it's usually fairly cut and dry if something's really broken. Let me put it that way. But point well taken, it's very important to go both ways, right? To see where the actual drop is.
Because the drop could be happening on the return rate.
Yep. That's right. 100% correct. So as he was saying, it could also be dropping on the return route. Also completely valid and extremely important to know, right? So, but like I said, I won't dig too deep in MTR, but it's awesome. Learn it. It's really useful. Put it in your tool belt. It'll save your butt. Save mine from 35 angry developers. So, this is my favorite question. So, it's the middle of the workday. You're in the office, and all of a sudden, no users can connect to the wireless network. But users already connected are working without any problem. What would you do to figure out the issue? Okay, you had your hand up first, you're next.
First, I would look at the DHCP scope and see, look at your leases and see if you've exhausted IP addresses from your DHCP server.
I feel like this has happened to you before. Yes, sir, you're next.
Same thing, it happened to me before.
I was going to say, okay, 2 people I like already. Again, if I could throw you a beer, be a thing right now. Yes, sir, then you.
Didn't you post these answers on the doc?
What's that? I like you because you actually read, and you actually went through and looked at it.
Same thing. Wait, this sounds familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. See, but what I like is I now know the guy who actually read. Makes me happy. He's seriously. No, that's great. It's actually a funny story about this is that I didn't realize they were actually going to post all of that. I thought that was just going to the internal Linuxfest folks as far as, basically sussing out what we would be discussing. And then apparently they saw fit to put that on the site. Mm-hmm. I was ecstatic. But anyways, so yeah, any other? Yes?
I'd make sure to check the length of time that it was holding leases.
Was that time that it's holding leases? Yes, absolutely. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
You already had your radius thing working, right?
Was that radius thing? Radius thing's working flawlessly, including with wireless networking. Yes.
Well, then you could check your LDAP too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the radius.
Absolutely. You absolutely could do that. See what's going on. See if I'm getting a bunch of errors in my logs, but somebody just railing away at me, right? Absolutely. Yeah, definitely something to check. Yes, sir.
Along those lines, what are we talking about for your wireless device in this case?
So
is your DHCP controller separate?
So DHCP was managed on a separate box, and as far as what's that?
Was it on or did it turn off?
No. Let me clarify. DHCP was on,
all right,
and that much was working. But as far as wireless goes, I'll touch on that. So the wireless access points that we had, you could configure them to point to that same open radius server we were talking about to handle that handoff. So what was nice about that was we could take the 802.1x out, so to speak, and just kind of deal with the radius to LDAP talk backend, which was really nice. So we actually could take a step away. So that was even more efficient than wired. Yes, sir.
Troubleshooting, you could set a static IP address and see if it works.
Yeah, absolutely I could. Absolutely. Anybody else? No? Yes? Yes, no? All right. So, as we were talking about a moment ago, so we reviewed the wireless infrastructure and we saw more clients were trying to connect than IP addresses were available in the Wi-Fi VLAN. Live in the middle of the day, I had to go and move and resize the VLAN from a /24 to a /20. And I was ready to have a heart attack in the middle of the day. And fortunately, no one was chanting hate at me at that point, but it was kind of horrible. Let me tell you, you never ever want to do that, ever in the middle of the day. Certainly not if it's the first or second time you've done it. But basically, we had a ton of mobile devices that we used for testing and various things like that. So while we maybe had 200 and I think the accurate number was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 215 or 220 individuals, a /24 would have been sufficient. What folks didn't realize was when you start thinking about how many clients actually connect, not how many people, the average person in that office had 3 to 4 devices. So now all of a sudden that goes into a much bigger number, right? So we eventually ran out. So it was no fun, but fortunately everything did work out. Nobody threatened my life. Yes, sir, and then you.
You guys did have different VLANs for like mobile phones or something like that.
So
that'd be a different network, right? A different subnet.
Correct. So the way that we handled that was we had a segregated Wi-Fi VLAN, but we also had with the access points we had in the wireless infrastructure, we were able to logically segregate out, say, like a guest network, a BYOD network, things like that, where we could lock down all of that good stuff.
So it's still the same network. So you're
Exactly.
using primary and secondary VLANs?
Correct. So basically, same physical network, logical segregation.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it was the same question. So they were just VLAN apart. They weren't actually separate subnets with different masks.
Yeah. So basically, so we went from a /24 mask, so 253 addresses, to a /20, right? So we were just expounding that. And as far as the logical segregation of the VLAN, that was done at the access point level, as far as like the various networks. So you could lock it down to almost, basically nothing. Like you could literally not let anybody go to social networks or anything horrible or whatever, and basically they just get the internet and mail, right? So that was how we actually decided to segregate it out. But to give you a little bit more behind the scenes, so we also had a VLAN per department is the way that we broke it out. And we also had inter-VLAN security. So what do I mean when I say that? Basically, you sitting at your desk could not SSH or remote to or do evil things to this other young gentleman up here because we didn't let you. Same thing with, we also had a separate VLAN for, say, like printers. Why? Because they suck to secure, and they're usually insanely insecure. So basically, we just only allowed, say, like, line printer daemon or something like that to talk to the printer. Off you go. That's it, right? Because there's not, with the absence of, say, like a centralized print server, that's kind of the best you can do for the most part. Yes, sir.
So all of these were ACLs on the switch or firewalls?
So it was actually a bit of both. Because the way that the VLANs and things were set up were not the way they should have been set up. I had made the proposal to change them to the way it should have been set up, which should be on the firewall so that the ACLs would work properly. Unfortunately, long before I came to the town and put on my shield and my spurs, they were put on the switches. So that severely limited my options as to what I could do. However, there were various filters and things like that that were somewhat nerfed ACLs that I could use on the switch. To answer that question. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on this? Yes?
Was your VLANing Mac-based, or was it set up based off of your network authentication?
It was set up off of network authentication. I almost never did Mac because I didn't hate myself. That said, another little tidbit is, so if any of you work for ever or currently work for any corporations that need to be, say, PCI version 3 compliant, If you don't have some form of MAC authentication, or at least a pool of these are the Macs that are allowed to talk to my network, so that you know what should be connected, you fail. You fail hard if you don't have that, which is kind of crazy. I don't agree, but yeah, yes, sir.
If you had it connected to your network authentication, a user would be able to have multiple devices connected under one login. So like your phone and your laptop, for example,
Yep.
on the same network.
Yep, you could absolutely do that. So when we were talking about how we would handle that MAC bit, that one of the folks over here was like, "That's stupid." I sort of agree, depending on what you're really trying to do and accomplish. The wireless infrastructure and a lot of the other things were set up so that you could turn on learning. So you could just set everything up to learn the Macs for, say, a month, 2 months, whatever. And basically what we were going to do is, let's learn the Macs for a month or two. Realistically, somebody's probably not going to have too big of an issue in that time frame. If somebody happens to get a new phone or something, we were going to send out an email to the corporation and basically say, if you're going to be adding any devices, if you run your phone over with your car, whatever, things like that, if you want to put it on the network, if you want it on the internal network, right, if it's a laptop, whatever, you need to come to us. We need to take care of that before we can issue you another device. So that's how we were going to handle that, to answer your question. So it's not that there's not a way to handle it. It's just it's a huge pain in the butt. Let's be honest here. Yeah. So that's kind of the long and the short of it. That said, do you guys have any questions for me? Since I've literally been playing Inquisitor for the last I don't know how long now. But what questions do you guys have? Yes.
If you actually had the money for the nicer stuff, would you actually go with that, or would you stick with the network setup you have now?
If I had the money for nicer stuff, would I stick with what I had, or would I get new stuff?
Get the nicer stuff, of course.
I was just gonna say, I'm a geek and nerd at heart. I like the pretty shiny. I want new. I want exciting. No, in all seriousness, I would probably spend a few more dollars and spend a lot more time on the planning and architecture of it, as opposed to just throwing in what's cheap and works. Cheap and works is usually a fast way to get yourself in trouble. Yes, sir.
So
Anyway, so you were saying the Panda had low I/O effect, or effects on the I/O.
Yes.
But what is the trade-off for network congestion then?
Next to nothing, ironically. So the way that they achieved that was there was basically a back end of data center filled with what they called cloud servers. Really just their stuff, right, in their data center that did all of the heavy lifting. So really, they were just kind of talking and streaming data at the time, but it wasn't like something like, say, Skype, where I join a Skype call and I just watch my bandwidth go through the roof because Skype sucks and it requires a lot of bandwidth to hold a video call, right? So fortunately, there was a lot of compression and things built in. So basically, that's a long way of saying they built a good application that offloaded all of that work off of my network, which was really nice. So there was very, very minimal communication. It was fantastic, actually. Gentlemen, I think he was behind you. Yeah, good.
Okay. Just on the Panda question,
Yes.
If people brought in new devices and you weren't doing MAC filtering or prevention, and they authenticated to the network, how did you ensure that Panda was then reinstalled or installed in the new device?
So at the network switch level and on the wireless access point level, there were administration tools and options. I had to basically disallow anybody connecting to the network if they didn't pass, X, Y, and Z requirements. One of those was Panda, and one of those was also antivirus. Period. So, like, even for our guest network, if you don't have some form of antivirus, you don't get internet. That's kind of how we set that up. But that was more or less how we handled that. So yeah, yes, sir.
It seems like you went through a lot of pain because
I'm glad you feel that way too.
Of the no domain criteria. Have you considered Samba 4's making a domain controller from Samba 4?
Oh yeah, I mean, I wanted to make a domain out of anything. I wanted somebody to pull something out of a dumpster to let me make it a domain. I would have taken anything.
What prevented you?
Management at the time. they absolutely unequivocally would not let me put anything on a domain because they're like, oh no, your developers will revolt. Nobody will let them go on a workstation or have their workstation on a domain. Oh, and I'm like, so do you want an enterprise network? Because most people, generally, that's what they do. There are lots of good reasons. Because it wasn't even like a Windows AD thing versus, say, like, like you said, Samba before, insert 5 other options I could rattle off the top of my head, right? It was, they just didn't want to do it and refused to give me any money to do it. And I'm like, seriously, guys, I'll go buy like, $300 box and I'll just go do it. Like, I don't care. Like, yeah, it kind of got to that point. But to answer your question, would I have made a domain if I could? Absolutely. And going back to your question, would I have bought something new as far as like a solution equipment or something like that? Absolutely, especially for that. What else? Yes, sir.
What do you do for monitoring? Monitoring your server health. I given the fact that you seem to have a limited budget, I suspect you would be using an open source solution rather than
yeah.
something.
So I can tell you. So the story I was telling you today is not where I am today, fortunately, for lots of reasons. But what I can tell you is where I am today, relating back to this. We actually, and we also had one there for our client servers and things like that. Nagios. We used Nagios for monitoring. It was fantastic. These days, I would probably encourage people to look at both Nagios and Isinga too. I'm probably pronouncing that horribly wrong. Please don't murder me, Isinga people. That said, basically, Nagios has been around forever. It's awesome. But, the fork heard round the world many years ago. It split into what's now Isinga 2. So a lot of the original folks from Nagios went to Isinga 2 and basically said, hey, all these things that people have been griping about for 15 or 20 years, we're not going to backport it there. We're going to put it into this new thing. So a lot of the fixes and a lot of optimizations have gone into Isinga 2 as opposed to Nagios. Not to say that they have not fixed many things in Nagios, but specifically Nagios Core because it's free. And actually, in my opinion, it's actually much more robust than their commercial XI product for a lot of different reasons. But what else you got? Questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have any per client bandwidth throttling set up?
Did we have any per client bandwidth throttling set up?
And then developers that pissed them off.
Yeah, wait. You know what? I'm going to tell you a funny story just because you said that. So the short answer, from the client side, not so much. We kind of let them do what they needed to do since it was kind of a mobile commerce space. So we generally tried to untap the cork as much as possible for them for obvious reasons. So he made a joke about only the developers who pissed me off. So, funny story.